There is a version of standing still that most people will never understand. Not the stillness of waiting, not the patience of a man who has nothing better to do. I mean the other kind, the stillness that costs something, that is purchased hour by hour, that accumulates in the arches of your feet, and the locked joints of your jaw, and the place behind your eyes where the wind has been blowing for 8 years and you have never once let it show. That is what the post is. That is what I gave it. I tell you this not to complain. I tell you this so you understand what it meant when I stepped off it. His name was Sergeant Aldrich Fenn. In the regiment he was known by his rank and nothing else. That was his preference, and that was the custom. And when younger guardsmen asked about him, they were told simply that Sergeant Fenn was the finest section commander in the regiment's recent history, and that any guardsmen who served under him came away either twice as good or entirely washed out, depending on what he was made of. I came away twice as good. I will carry that debt until I die. He had spent 23 years in the regiment before his lungs gave out. Not the work. The work never touched him. The years. A man who had marched in formation through rain and sun, and the particular cold that rises off palace stone at 4 in the morning does not worry much about comfort, but the body keeps its own accounts. And at the end of his 23rd year, Sergeant Fenn's body called them due. The illness was not dramatic. It simply arrived as these things do and set about its business. I had been told he was declining. I had visited him twice at the care facility on the far side of the city, a clean and quiet place with wide windows and no smell of anything, which is its own kind of sadness. He had been thinner each time, but his eyes were the same. That was the thing about Fenn. Whatever the body surrendered, the eyes did not negotiate. They were still the eyes of the man who had stood me upright at age 19 and explained, without cruelty or sentiment, that a guardsman does not perform discipline. He becomes it. I did not know he was coming that morning. I was at my post on the east side of the forecourt, the third position on the ceremonial line, between the gilded railing and the stone arch that has stood on that spot for longer than anyone in the regiment can reliably account for. It was a clear morning in late autumn, the kind where the sky is bright but gives no warmth, and the crowds were already 3 deep along the forecourt barrier, phones raised, waiting for the march to begin. I had taken my position at 8:45. I was not thinking about anything. That is the discipline. You do not think about things. You become the post. The march was on its second pass when I heard the exchange at the thus side gate. I did not turn my head. A guardsman does not turn his head. But I have spent 8 years learning to hold a wide field of hearing while my eyes hold forward. And what I heard was this, a voice I recognized, lower and slower than I remembered it, but recognizable, the way the shape of a building is still itself when the paint has gone, saying that he did not need to come inside, only to stand near the railing for one pass, only to hear it once more. And another voice, clipped, administrative, the voice of a man whose authority lives entirely in a clipboard, explaining that visitors to the ceremonial forecourt required a medical clearance and an escort authorization, and that the side gate was not a public entrance, and that he was very sorry, but rules were rules, and perhaps the gentleman would like a brochure. There was a third voice, softer, the orderly who had brought him, I learned later, driving 2 hours because she had not known how to refuse a man like Fenn any more than I had, explaining quietly that he was not well and had come a long way and perhaps an exception could be made. The clipboard voice explained that exceptions were not within his remit. I stood at my post. The march passed. The crowd applauded. I heard the drum major's commands, crisp as always, carrying across the forecourt the way sound carries off stone on a cold morning. I heard Fenn's voice go quiet. I stood at my post. They would not let him through. The clipboard man had found his footing on the ground of procedure, and was not moving, and from the quality of the silence that followed, I understood that Fenn had stopped arguing, not because he had accepted it, but because he was the kind of man who would rather go without than beg, and who had spent 23 years training himself never to show the cost of anything. I thought about the morning he had found me sitting on my kit bag in the barracks corridor, at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep before my first ceremonial post, convinced I was going to break position and disgrace myself and everyone who had trained me. He had not sat down. He had stood in the corridor in his undershirt and looked at me for a long moment and said, "The post is not about you. Once you understand that, the rest is easy." I thought about the 2 foreign tours we had served together before ceremonial duty, and about a particular afternoon, in a particular place I will not describe, where the discipline he had built into me, the discipline of not flinching, of not reacting, of holding while everything around you asks you not to, was the only thing that kept both of us standing at the end of it. I thought about what he had asked for, one pass, only to hear it once more. The drum major's voice rose with the next command. I stepped off my post. It is not a small thing. 8 years, not once. The guardsman to my left registered it with a fractional shift of the eyes, the way a man notes something strange in the middle of a sentence and keeps reading. I crossed the forecourt at a measured walk, not hurrying, because a guardsman does not hurry. He moves with purpose, and came to the side gate and said, "He comes through." Something in my voice, or perhaps simply the sight of a guardsman walking out of the ceremonial line, settled the question in a way that brochures and remits could not. I wheeled Sergeant Fenn to the railing myself. He did not speak. He sat upright in the wheelchair with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes on the marching line, and I stood beside him with my bearskin on and my gloves and my rifle, not at the post, but near enough to it that the discipline was still present in every line of my body, and the march came toward us for its final pass of the morning. I do not know how Drum Major Hessel saw him from that distance. Perhaps someone told him by radio. Perhaps the drum major, who had served in the regiment longer than I had, and who had known Aldrich Fenn when Fenn was the one bringing young guardsmen upright, simply recognized the shape of a man he had stood beside for years. What I know is that as the formation drew level with the railing, Drum Major Hessel turned his staff, not the passing salute but the full dress salute, called sharp and clear across the forecourt, and the formation followed, 60 arms snapping to the carry in unison, and the drums held for one clean beat longer than the standard. The crowd went quiet, I mean completely quiet, 300 people with their phones in the air, and not a word among them, because some things are louder than commentary. Sergeant Fenn sat still for a moment after the formation had passed. Then he straightened his shoulders. The old habit, the one that never left him, and he said, without looking at me, "You stepped off your post." I told him I had. He said, "I'll note it in your record." I told him he was welcome to. He did not say anything else for a long time. The crowd began to move, and the forecourt filled again with ordinary noise, and the orderly came to take him back to the car. Sergeant Fenn let her arrange the chair's handles without objection, which told me more than his voice did about how tired he was. He died 11 days later. I was told he died the way he had done everything, without ceremony, without fuss, in his own time. I was given a formal reprimand for leaving the ceremonial line. One paragraph, filed, noted. I accepted it without objection, because a guardsman does not argue with a consequence that was earned. But I will tell you what I know. The post is not about you. Sergeant Fenn told me that when I was 19 years old, and I have believed it ever since. It is not about the rule book, or the clipboard, or the remit of the man at the side gate. The post is about what you owe, to the regiment, to the uniform, to the men who built you into the shape you hold. And sometimes what you owe cannot be paid from behind a railing. That morning, for the first time in 8 years, I understood that stepping off the post and honoring it were the same thing. I returned to my position when the forecourt cleared. I stood until the end of the shift. I did not move.